part of the benefit of Beyond the Core, and one of the reasons why it's good to do that, it's kind of hard to hide the financials when it's a separate, distinct entity. It doesn't get blurred in. Well, that's not my fault. That's the underlying platform that's serving these others. No, it's your platform. It's not my operations. Yeah, it's your operations. It's not my sales. You see where it goes. It becomes very clear. So I think you have financial clarity if you set these up correctly. Now, you can do anything you want. You can do a lot with financials, right?
Yes.
How you structure, how you track, what level. But there is a simplicity to a distinct and discrete P&L.
Todd, it's great to see you again. Thank you for joining us. We met, maybe it was about a year ago or so. I can't remember exactly when you were at 8451, which is a fascinating company. And you'll tell us a little bit about it. You know, a data company that came out of Kroger that works with a whole variety of other businesses, a subsidiary, new venture focused on growth that emerged out of Kroger. You're no longer at 8451. I know you've now gone off to start your own business, Aurora Insights, and that'll be something we can talk about as well, focused on AI, which has been a thread through your career. So maybe we jump right in and share a little bit with us about what is 8451 and what was your role there, and thinking about that as growth beyond the core.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. Obviously exciting times. So there's a lot going on, and yeah, I mean, I was at 8451 and spent time at Fidelity before then. So I think there's some real good opportunities to talk about beyond the core. But yeah, I think pulling back some of the mystery from what 8451 is. Like I remember walking into a conference up in Boston, and someone was talking about this company in Cincinnati that had all these numbers. And like you said, it's a data company that really need things. And everyone's always, what's 8451? So I was there for about 4 years. I was also part of Kroger during the time. I had roles in both, but let me just start with 8451. I'd be happy to talk about that because I was really enjoyed spending my time there. It's a wholly owned subsidiary of Kroger. It is a retail insights media company that basically helps CPGs understand the path to purchase using data for their products. And it's also a retail media company that provides them opportunities to have a closed loop and to be able to activate against those insights. And I think broader than that 8451, it's a data science company for Kroger. So there's, on the commercial side, we have that insights business, or 8451 has that insights business. You can tell I'm still fresh, only a few weeks since I left there. But has insights business, a media business, a venture capital business that's pretty exciting around identifying companies in the food space. Use the science to identify it, and then when you invest, you put them on the shelves at Kroger. So that's commercial side, and that's about 60% of 8451. The other 40% is basically the data science arm for the parent company. So around all the artificial intelligence. So, and what's interesting, the numbers 8451, and I love this is the longitude of Cincinnati, where Kroger and 8451 sit. And so if you Q2 longitudinal analysis, that's where the four numbers with the decimal point and the degree sign come from. So yeah, it was a special place for me. I enjoyed being there. Also created a really good opportunity through that role. I probably spent, when I first started, most of my time at 8451. By the time I left, I was spending probably a little over half the time in Kroger, where, within 8451, I was chief data technology officer for that company. But at Kroger, I had the opportunity to run AI for the company, enterprise data, as well as the R&D group. So interesting role. You get to work in a separate subsidiary, and you also get to deal with a whole different set of opportunities in a $140 billion retailer that gives a lot of diversity to the role.
It just seems like it was a bold. I know you weren't there when they created 8451, but like, that's a bold move, and maybe a rare move for a company of Kroger's size to create this subsidiary and you've maybe seen similar things at others as well. Like, how do companies get to a place where they say, we're going to go create this net new business? It will be valuable to our core, but they're also, of course, selling to other CPGs. They're selling to other retailers. So, to me, how do you think about that strategically when you look at sort of really taking big bets?
First of all, I would, I give a lot of credit to the leadership at the time at Kroger, as well as the Dunnhumby team that was part of that move that moved into 8451. Kroger, if you go back to the start of the business with Barney Kroger back in the 1800s, it's a company that always tries to innovate and always looks ahead. And it's an industry that moves very fast. So, there was an understanding there at the time that the opportunity existed to think a little bit differently about the traditional grocery space, to be able to use data to better help customers have a more seamless experience, to be able to help CPGs better understand the path to purchase for their customers. So, yeah, I think it was a very bold move at the time, and in a lot of ways was ahead of the industry. And I give a lot of credit. We were part of a lot of change along the way to continue to evolve that model. But to your question, I think where you're going is like, why separate? I mean, it's a wholly owned subsidiary, right? It's off on the side, and if you've been to the facility, you've got a traditional corporate environment for Kroger, exciting place to work, a lot of exciting technology, passion in the stores. But if but you get what you think you'd get from a large corporate environment when you go into the buildings and you see the feel. 8451 was built very different. Like, if you've been in the offices, all open space, my desk, the president's desk, sitting at a long row of tables, just like everyone else's, no offices. There was a desire to create a very different kind of look, feel, and culture within that space. A culture that aligned to the parent company, but nonetheless, a very different environment, a very different culture, that I think kind of set it apart. So, I give a lot of credit there. I've seen this at other places. I mean, you see businesses get incubated within financial services. You see, we could talk about a government example if you ever want to dig into that. There's some pretty good examples of where you're able to do that. But what I would say is I think the desire was to create something that could still sit on the outside and be able to provide some of those provocative opinions based on data, to be able to challenge, to have that distance so that you're not absorbed in the day to day, where there could be some more clarity around the insights that are being driven from the data. And there's also reasons too. When you start working with a broader marketplace, there's value in having a distinct brand for a set of offerings that's different than what the core company had. So I think those drove to a lot of the decisions.
And I think, you just said it right there, having a bit of that distance creates the right kind of third space. Um, Talk a little bit about, I mean, in fact, that you've done so much in your career on the digital transformation side, but as well having this role that was kind of going inside and outside, which I think was quite interesting from a different lens on just how to build adjacent businesses.
Yeah, it's interesting. I spent 15 years at Fidelity, and before that I was at Deloitte. And you saw a lot of different things. And there's some common threads, but then I'll get back to a little bit what's different probably in my last role. Um, there's always a desire when you're starting something new to give it enough space. One, to be creative, to be able to make mistakes at a lesser level. You sacrifice scale a bit. And so, I remember in financial services, there were times where new businesses like the stock plan business at Fidelity and the uh, human resource payroll business that they stood up, keeping that separate from the financial services for several reasons. One, you want to be able to create that space to innovate, to grow. You also want to be in a position where you're not necessarily getting crushed by the machine. And I think that desire was also there, and it was one of the reasons when Kroger was or 8451 was established as a distinct entity. It gave it that separation, that ability to move at speed. What's a little bit different, I think, from being on the inside, like the examples I said in financial services, these businesses still set within the core company. They were still part of the core company. And, in some ways that was better for when it reaches scale. It makes it a little bit easier to make the integration. It's still the same culture. It's still the same business environment, same badges, same offices. You walk down the hall and interact. With the subsidiary, you do get a little more distance, and I think there's pros and cons to that, right? Early on, a lot of pros and cons for being able to operate at a different speed, right? You've got a data science business that needs to build up an infrastructure quickly to be able to serve a set of external clients. You're looking at a grocery that's supporting 2,500 stores, $140 billion business. Dealing with point of sale, dealing with supply chain. It's a little bit easier to move fast and break things when you're separate from that. Like, you don't want to move fast and break grocery retail and shut down people's ability to buy milk and eggs, right? I do think that separation in that environment was really, really good. And I think it served the organization really, really well as it built. And, 8451's been a very successful entity within the larger company. There's trade-offs too, right? If you look on, when you set aside a separate entity, one of the things that I learned pretty quickly when I got there is, from the commercial side, that separation was key. That separation, the ability to move at pace, the ability to make localized technical decisions that don't impact the parent company, and to be able to work out of an investment stream that's generated through your profits, allows you to move a lot quicker. But on that Kroger model side, early on, it creates a lot of independence, and that's strong. That ability to be the data science arm for Kroger, you have the independence. You do run the risk sometimes of being a little too far from the business, and you lose a little bit of business intimacy. So there's a give and take between where you want to be independent, where you want to be able to move fast, and where, quite frankly, you need to be on the floor, you need to be intimate, you need to be part of that business. And when you have different cultures and you have different structures for how you think about compensation, and different systems even to collaborate across businesses, that just as there's benefits, there's also a little bit of a tax.
Yeah, Todd, what's the balance in talent that had the institutional knowledge that kind of moved over, or what do you think is the best balance of having of external internal talent?
I think you need both. I think there are places where you can isolate and you have the benefit of saying, we can operate within the context of this distinct business, whether it's a business within a financial services company, or it's part of a distinct, discrete subsidiary of a company. For me, if you are not in a position where you have sufficient context to deliver value, then you're too far away from the business. If there are a cultural or a technical separation that makes it hard, you can actually delay the pace and the impact that you have. And there's no perfect answer. And I'm not saying one company did something right, another company did something wrong. This is a balance that you have to kind of work with, because I think too, you have different businesses within a large business or subsidiary. They're different brands. They're co-opted, but they're different brands. They attract different people who want different things from their career. So it's a real balance. But I think if you get to a point where you are seeing part of your value proposition degrade, or maybe not move as fast as you would like it to, that's when you have to start to pivot. And I've seen that happen in two angles, right? I've seen it where a company reaches, you incubate it, and at some point, if the business is successful, that trade-off for intimacy, for pace, that gets outweighed by the ability to say, let's start pushing our platforms together to get scale. Let's integrate our sales teams, and we'll come back to that, right? If you're confusing the market. I've also seen cases where, you're operating so independently that, there's value. And that's something we were really focused on at 8451, on that part of the business that was focused on Kroger, is wear your 8451 badge, wear your Kroger badge, but we're going to form teams using structures like Agile that allow us to push the right people on the right team, get them as close as possible to the business, move with pace. And some of the benefits we started to see there is, yeah, you might lose a little bit of your independence, but you're also understanding the nature of the work a lot better. And you're starting to get more organic ideas, and you're building at scale to be able to insert high velocity science at the point of consumption, as opposed to moving from one tech pipeline to another tech pipeline. Here's a scored model. Are you ready to accept it? It's much easier to work hand in hand with the tech teams from the right organizations to build science into that point of consumption, either for a customer or for an associate. So those are some of the balances you have to think about. The other big one I saw is sometimes your independence and your desire, especially less with a separate branded subsidiary, but it can happen there. But more when you're within a large company and you've got a group that's discrete and they are full stack and they have everything from their technology to their operations to their own sales force because they understand the product and they can sell it and they can do it really well. Challenge they run into is you've got a customer going, "Hey, I talked to one of you yesterday, and it was a salesperson for the main line. It was a salesperson for the subsidiary." And you can start to confuse your customers, and that's a balance that you have to watch as well.
Yeah, we actually saw that working with some companies where they had sort of a separate group doing, new innovative products. They would bring those to the customer and the customer would be like, or they bring them to the salesperson and the salesperson would say, "I don't want to sell this new thing. I have quota on this other thing." So then you would end run around your own salespeople to try to go direct to the customer. And the customer would be like, "Who are you? And why are you selling me this random thing? Where's John, my sales guy? He's the guy I always buy from." So that go to market distribution is tough.
I talked to him yesterday. Why didn't he bring this up? Why didn't he tell me about your offering? And you're looking, and in a large company, it's very easy. If Mary was there the day before, Mary surely would like to talk about it, but she might not know enough about the product because Billy represents the product. And no offense to Mary and Billy, whoever they may be, but you nailed it. I mean, that's the challenge.
It sounds to me like, because you've worked in a variety of subsidiary, internal, a whole variety of different cases. To me, is it just case by case at this point?
I would put it even more simply, right? It's you may have to recalibrate a little bit as the business goes. I mean, every business you grow, and we can even talk on a more micro level, at a team level where you do this even within businesses and you give full autonomy to a product team to be able to deliver and support their product end to end. At some point, the volumes get enough that if you don't get scale on the O&M side of that business, on the operations and maintenance, and think differently about that, you start to degrade your ability to innovate. And so, that's part of the dial. Where do you have to start thinking of, do I push it into the larger corporate infrastructure that's built for scale so that we can continue to innovate? Because you reach that breaking point. And I think that's what's so critical to be able to manage and look for. And by the way, that creates all kinds of cultural things, right? Because all of us as business people, we want our arms around all of it. You're going to hold me accountable. I want end-to-end accountability. Who doesn't? And now you're saying, I've been doing this for years. I grew it. I was successful. But there's an acknowledgement that some of what you're doing maybe become a division as opposed to an independent business within a company. And that's where you're dealing not just with the business, and the dial doesn't just turn the how you operate. It also kind of turns the culture and the emotional aspects of people that have been very passionate about their independence in building that business. And that's tough to work through. And that's, by the way, you want passionate people that feel ownership. And then you're going in and you're telling them, "Hey, maybe that part of it should go here and we should plug it into the main record keeping system. Or maybe that should be something that we hand over to the tech team and the parent company." That's tough. And it should be.
Yeah, I'm curious. I mean, like, you've had so much experience in different organizations building beyond the core. How have you seen the best cases of convincing skeptical execs to build businesses beyond the core? Because you've seen a lot of exciting and I think really successful initiatives in different organizations where in most cases it's hard to even get there.
Yeah, it's funny. I have yet to see, and we'll talk. I've seen organic teams that come up, right? organic product teams down in the organization where it kind of bubbles up and you don't need a lot of top down. It's an experiment that a couple of executives or even a couple of managers decide to run. That's different. I think what you're talking about is, hey, this new business, it may feel like retirement, but it's not necessarily going to sit in the retirement business. Or, hey, this new business is a wholly owned subsidiary as opposed to a division. Those are, I've never seen that work without the highest levels of leadership decision making to drive and support that, and to and to have a leadership team that is co-supporting each other, understanding why that is. Like, it's not just to say where I've seen this work. It's not just the CEO or the chairman coming in and saying this needs to happen. It's broader understanding and advocacy across the leadership team, because from time to time discussions come up. Should we do this and should we do that? And where you have a group of leaders that are sorting through and going, is this the time? Is it not the time? And able to disagree with each other to get to the right point. But you've got people that understand why it is so they can make that decision for non-parochial reasons. I think that's the most important aspect. I don't know how you do it without that support, because otherwise someone is going to be influential enough to go back and go, I can see what that can do for my business and I'm going to pull it in. The problem with that is you don't want to do that. If you pull it in, you lose visibility from a financial, and the term I've heard and I've used it is, you bring them in too quick, you break them, you absorb them. They get absorbed, they get swallowed.
It's not even necessarily intentional.
Yeah. No one wants to do that, but if you pull it in so soon, it becomes part of the machine and you never really get to figure out what it is.
But do you think there is a way to, let's say you're not a C-level and you see an opportunity to do something innovative, disruptive, growth-oriented outside of incremental innovation? Do you think there's a way to go to the C-level and be like, folks, we should do this? Or do you think the C-level has to wake up one day and say, I think we should do this?
It depends on size and scope. I'm talking like business unit level, right? Building a business, acquiring a business. It's a major investment. Those decisions with that money level is going to be at that level anyway, even if it's within a business. So they have to sit there. Where I see the opportunity, I think your question's going, is companies that I've worked with that really push that are open to experimentation. And a lot of times that experimentation can happen 2-3 levels below the C level. And, the best example is, you want to do full stack product teams and you want to integrate across businesses. And you want to be able to say, I want to break down barriers instead of a team over here does science, a team over here does tech, and a team over here trains the people to absorb it in the business. Let's put them together virtually. Those types of decisions to prove a concept, I actually think everyone in an organization, a good organization, should be empowered to be able to do that, to be able to test it, to be able to try it. Because that's where you start to learn and say, hey, here's a new way of working. And that does get the attention. And that does get the opportunity to push it. And a lot of times it's stuff that doesn't require, hey, we're going to call it a new business and make it, we're not going to name it. But what you can say is how they're working here is a great example. We know it works. We know it drives more value. Let's port it across to these other opportunities and make it a new way of working. And that bottoms up innovation between you and me is probably more important than where we started the discussion.
Right. And that sounds like to me, there's a little bit of org design there. It's the sort of a cross-functional team that gets together to go do something, as opposed to a researcher saying, I researched a thing, I got an insight, now I throw it over to the product team scopes it out, now they throw it over the wall or the fence to the dev team builds it. That's disaster.
That jump are so many opportunities. Each one goes to a new queue. I get done here, then I get to the back of the next line. Then I get to the back of the next line. And there's so many opportunities to break. It can be org design. I actually think one of the beautiful things, like agile methodologies, and you can talk about what model you use and how they're implemented, but there's a beauty to, we're going to put you together. We're going to hold you to a common goal. We're not going to change your badge. We're not going to change your reporting structure. But day to day, this individual is driving the tasking on behalf of the business. And no matter where you sit organizationally, you're going to support that day to day. Now, the existing managers, they're still weighing in on staffing decisions, performance, and everything else. But talent development, so that you have a data science lead developing a data science person, that's probably pretty good to keep that functional alignment. But it gives you flexibility to test stuff without a major reorganization.
Yeah, it's more creating a squad.
That could lead to that. I've seen it lead to that. We're like, well, this looks like a team person in charge, and their leaders know how to develop all these different functional. We're kind of playing around here. Let's just make it a team. But you don't have to. And generally, I wouldn't suggest starting there.
Yeah, you kind of noticed having ownership is such a critical component. And like you described before, it can come bottom up or top down, and who's really championing it. I guess the question I would have is, how does it really go towards to, learn from the mistakes of starting, adjacent businesses? Do you have any, advice or perspective on that from all your experience?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen mistakes. I mean, there was
Never made any mistakes.
He's only seen them.
He's only seen the mistakes. Just to point that out.
Yeah, if you want to have a separate podcast on my mistakes, you should do that. And I'll be honest, anyone that has anything worth listening to has made mistakes, right? Otherwise, they're not testing themselves, or they're lying. But we will appeal to people's better angels and just say everyone's made mistakes, and we'll tell the truth. But here's where I think it's happened, and I've seen it happen with business. There was a business at one point in my career, and for the mistakes, I won't talk about the companies. And as a consultant, you can never figure it out. Was it one he worked at, or was it a consultant?
100%. No, we don't need to name companies now.
Yeah, it was a business that was built. It was an offering that was not core to the nature of the business, but it was complementary. So I'll give you just a simple example. If you were to take it to a product, potato chips and beer are different, but on a Sunday, they're complementary, right? So it was a service that when you went to this particular, it was a B2B buy, and you went to him, he said, here's my core. A lot of times they'd say, can't you take care of this for me as well? And so they stood up an adjacency to take care of that as well. Makes sense. And I evaluated 3 times, and each time I said, we shouldn't be doing this. And the third time, stopped, right? But evaluated 3 times looking at this nature. I did twice. Someone else came in and came to the same conclusion between my first and second time. And what happened there was, it's tough because for the people on the sales team, they're like, I want to be able to offer this because it helps me against the competitor. There was a little bit of data, because you got to look at data at all times, that said it actually creates a little bit of stickiness around client retention. So you're like, well, maybe it's worth to do. When you got into the data, you started looking that varied based on market size. And then you started looking and saying, even within that market size, there are different economics. So we were losing a lot more where it didn't matter, and not making as much overall where it did matter. But it wasn't a clear cut yes or no. In the end, it wasn't a business that organization was able to scale. It wasn't a business that was able to be profitable. So that, at some point you come up with different alternatives. But the challenge there is you can hang on too long. And you can bleed. For some companies, they can afford to do that. My favorite example, my understanding, talking about a different company, is like, you look at Fidelity. I don't think they didn't come out of the gate making a lot of money on their 401k, is my understanding. It took a while for that, but that was clearly something we're sticking with, right? A new offering. So, there are times to make that bold bet and to ride out the storm. So you don't want to jump too soon and miss that opportunity. There are also times where you realize you're not in storms. You actually put the boat in the rapids, and it's never going to change.
And do you think, going back, if they had maybe a more robust validation phase to take a decision quicker, that would have benefited building these businesses beyond the core, or was it just entrenched?
I think there are things you can do. I do think, part of the benefit of beyond the core, and one of the reasons why it's good to do that, it's kind of hard to hide the financials when it's a separate, distinct entity. It doesn't get blurred in. Well, that's not my fault. That's the underlying platform that's serving these other. No, it's your platform. It's not my operations. Yeah, it's your operations. It's not my sales. You see where it goes. It becomes very clear. So I think you have financial clarity if you set these up correctly. Now, you can do anything you want. You can do a lot with financials, right? How you structure, how you track, what level. But there is a simplicity to a distinct and discrete P&L that allows you should be able to track those. I think it's more you you've got to be able to look at the trends and you have to be able to de-average to understand because if you want to catch it earlier, it's probably not as simple as just looking at the financials. You're probably looking and saying, let's look at the market segments. Where are they profitable? Where are they not? What is the trajectory around the profitability? Is there increased government regulation on fees that are likely to impact it? Is there increasing competition that's going to impact us in a particular area? And so that idea of de-averaging and understanding the trends, like if the worst thing in the world to do is to say, I'm making money here, it's not big, but in 3 years, it's going to be as big as I want. And I might not want to do the rest, or I can carry the rest so that it doesn't matter and walk away, as opposed to sitting there and not realizing where you're making money is going to continue to decrease and you should probably back out of the entity. So it's more nuanced. Probably the best things, like everything you say, is, do you have the right telemetry, but also I think you need, I would say, mature, objective leadership, which we all strive to, but we're never at it. Yeah, I'm sure if you pulled Warren Buffett in here, and who knows, but he may not, but I would think he would probably be able to say at times he was not as objective as he wanted to be. And so, but objectivity over desire for control and performance, you need to be dispassionate and objective about the performance of these businesses, I think, is one of the.
Which is not easy to do.
No, because you're in it. I mean, people are working, 14-hour days driving these businesses. They put their heart, their soul, and that's what you want. You want that kind of individual, but you also need someone to kind of step back and go, I got to go in and kill this. And I got to take this thing that is my job, that I have built, that I now have enough information about to say, it's not going to work this way anymore.
Yeah, hard to have the courage to do that, because in my experience working with big companies, the notion of failure is nobody's celebrating failure. So it's hard, I think, for folks to look at it objectively, say, I just spent X amount of time, Y amount of dollars. I know this thing's not going to work, but if I could just push it a little further, maybe it'll be somebody else's problem.
I think I've always been successful. I'll get through this. I've got a good team, right? And it's hard. But objectivity, program, planned objectivity, leadership objectivity is very important.
It's hard in the corporate context to embrace failure, whereas in the startup context, that's part of the learning cycle, right? And so having a business beyond the core in the adjacency gives a little bit of both, right? You can have more courage, maybe more transparency. Like you said, the P&L is available there. And now in the advent of AI, I know you've been such an early adopter and leadership in AI specifically. It's changing how we're building businesses beyond the core. Would love to, hear some of your own thoughts now in 2025, how that's really radically changing building businesses beyond the core.
To be honest, and I'm very passionate on this point. I do think we are at a once in a lifetime, notwithstanding something with quantum, but a once in a lifetime global replatforming. And I do think, to your point, this idea beyond to push the barriers, to move beyond the core and change is critical. And I'll come back to one of the reasons why it's hard, because I've seen some shifts when you do this effectively on who's in what chairs. That changes typically as you start to become a more digital and data-driven business as opposed to your traditional operations. But what I would say is, here's what I've seen. Everyone's talking about AI. I had someone give me, and I can't say it. I can't say it on a podcast the way it was said, but it was brilliant, comparing AI to teenagers. But what I would say is everyone's trying it, and they're talking about it. Some of what they're talking about is true, some of it's not, some of it's overplayed. But the brutal reality, when you look at the data, those companies that have shifted their culture have not kept AI as separate from a strategy, something we're doing, but actually embedded it into the strategy, started to either evolve their teams and their leaders, or in certain cases, acquire new talents and skills, not just to manufacture it, but to run a data-driven business, right? You're doing a supply chain. You need someone who understands how to run an AI-driven, data-driven supply chain or financial product organization, or name your offering. But those companies that are doing that, as opposed to those companies that say, I have an AI use case, or, yeah, we're doing some reporting. The data is starting to tell a story. Like, I think the stat now is, I think it's like 70 to 78% of companies say, look, we're doing this. And that's up from like 50 some percent. I think it was like 53, 55 in 2023. So in 2024, 78, you're like, everyone's doing it. It's great. Then you peel it back and you look at those two examples of kind of those firms that are leading, where it's really part of their DNA. It's a very small percentage. And you look at the companies that are testing individual use cases and not really there. The difference is, I've seen reports that say upwards of 60% difference in profitability. I've seen reports that say 2 to 6x difference in total shareholder return. You're looking at improved customer engagement. You can disagree with those, divide them by half. Say the reports are wrong, divide them by half. Those numbers are material. And I have part of the passion project I've had is I've been looking at data independently, technical data on companies, where you're seeing what they're doing and you're weighing it up. These trends are real. So I think, you ask about AI, I think it's imperative not just that you start doing AI, but you figure out how to operationalize around it at scale to drive material economic value. Critical to make it integrated in your strategy, not separate from. Like, I'll even say it from time to time, AI strategy. You don't need an AI strategy other than the foundational elements so that you can scale and reuse. You need a business strategy that is rife and laced with AI, just as you do now. I mean, it's just another tool, right? We have our Lean Six Sigma, we have our automation, so we can improve process. Where we can't do that, we can automate. And where we can't do that now, historically, we've had pushed a burden to a customer or to an associate to make judgment decisions. That's the area that now we have a tool to be able to impact it. And just as those prior transitions, the companies that didn't do it got hurt, I think the same thing's going to happen here, and we're seeing it. I mean, the data is showing that. That's only going to accelerate.
Yeah, and I mean, you're just making the case of why having these adjacent venture studios can be so powerful, because you can really take those data.
Cool levels, 100%. I want to be. It's funny you bring up the studios. Let's go there. Like, I want to be clear. It's got to start with leadership. If you don't have leadership, it doesn't matter. You have an adjacent studio, and everyone's going to wonder in a few years why they didn't get the value out of it. But the adjacent studio concept, when you have that buy-in, is solves another problem we haven't talked about, right? Outside and inside innovation. How do you translate innovation, not from neat ideas that you quote in earnings reports? They get quoted. But that can actually be taken out of the lab and innovated. How and you see different approaches, right? You see innovation inside the company. Beauty there, they know the industry, but the challenge with this rate of change, how do you structure and operationalize the benefits of outside innovation? And Ben, you and I have talked about this at length and waxed philosophical, but I should say we've gone beyond that. But I mean, if you look at that, the venture studios are something that I think will actually become even more important to companies, and that type of concept. You can call it a venture studio. Or you say more structured engagement with innovators outside of my company, that in or adjacent to my ecosystem. I think it would be more important just based on the rate of change that we have. You can't innovate that fast inside your company. You can, but it's less likely.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. Do you think on the AI side that people don't realize. Yeah, I like your framing. You need a business strategy with AI. It's not like AI strategy. We're already past that stage. But do you think the companies that aren't doing that are scared of workforce impact, or are they just not aware that they need to speed up what they're thinking versus just like testing little things, which everybody is doing? Why aren't more companies doing real strategy with AI integrated into it and making it core to what they do?
First thing I'll say, I have not worked at a company where they were able to advance their AI capabilities in a meaningful and material way without the top executive support and bringing in his or her leadership team and bringing them that. If that dedicated focus isn't happening with that top support, I just haven't seen it work. Maybe it did somewhere. Maybe when you post this, we'll see it in the comments. And we did the whole thing. The senior leadership team didn't even know we did it. They're so lucky. But which would be kind of interesting to see, right? I don't think it's going to happen, but we'll encourage people to post that. I I I think I do think that as you kind of peel it back and go below that a bit, though, you've got that senior support. I think I'm anchored on two problems that I see out there, and you touched on one. One is I don't know what AI is. I don't know how to get started, and maybe even sometimes on a visceral level, like I'll tell you over this cup of coffee or over this glass of wine. I don't really want to figure out that I don't know how to use it to change my business. Can you help me? That's one set of problems, right? The zero to scale problem. The other problem is, hey, we've been doing these use cases. I'm AIing. I AI'd it. I've heard that term, AI'd it. Go out and AI it. The other challenge is, we've got these bespoke, discrete use cases, sometimes redundant, not fully integrated into a strategy. In the best case, they're adding some marginal value, which is good, paying for themselves. In the worst case, they are creating disjoint customer and associate experiences with different sciences and different data along the value stream. And I've seen that. A chatbot built one way for a phone associate, and a chatbot built another way for a call center employee. So you imagine you're the customer, you could get two answers depending on the support. So I do think that the second problem that we have is I have these use cases, I'm AIing it, but I'm not seeing that kind of material value that I expect to be transformative. How do I drive material economic value through these? How do I transform my business? How do I get to a point where I can actually scale? And that's the second class of problems that I'm seeing. And to be quite honest, that's a problem set I left. I think that problem is pretty pervasive across the global 1,000. And that's why I made that bet to leave a very good role at a very good company after talking to my wife, getting her support. For anyone aspiring to do that, I have lots of data points. You got to do that. Get your spouse on board. But that's the problems that I want to solve and why I see we're going out there. And I think you're hinting at them. That's why companies are getting stuck. The companies that aren't dealing with those problems are the companies that have 60% higher profitability, and they're seeing that benefit.
So what have you seen with leaders that any small things they can do to help kind of push it forward into the execution phase?
It's interesting. I think the first thing, what I would tell you got to give yourself some grace. This is new. I mean, these leaders are in roles because one, they're very intelligent. Two, they're emotionally aware. Three, they have worked days, nights, weekends, learning the ins and outs of their industry, learning the ins and outs of their function to get them to the positions they're in. So I think it starts with a little bit of grace, right? It's new. You're not supposed to know it. But knowing that you don't know it, start to lean in. And I do think, working as a leadership team in concert with each other, and then bringing in your next tier and next tier. I mean, I've seen some great examples of, I'll give these leaders credit. Like two examples, when we were working at Kroger to shift from what Rodney, who was CEO at the time, said is, Todd, I want you to stop pushing. I want them to pull, right? When they pull, they get it. And he was right. He had a leadership team up in, I won't say where, but up in New England at a pretty good tech college to reinforce it. And I was up there for the first part of it and working with them and giving them exposure. That's education. That's comfort, both on a knowledge and on an emotional level to get you there. It's those kind of events and signals. That's not like magic. You do that, but I think you need moments like that. Or I'll never forget. We had a session around AI with a group of top leaders at Fidelity. And then quietly in the first or second row, I look over and there's, the chairman, Abby, sitting there taking notes. Did she need to be there? No. But what a powerful message. So I do think, one thing, the leadership teams need to learn and they need to model as a start. And then there's education, it's educate, engage, and create awareness. And we could talk about the programs for doing that. But there's a structured way, a playbook that I think helps. But I also think as you look at it, the other thing everyone says is once you get that lineup, you work with leaders to get 1 or 2 projects to reinforce that what they learned is something that can actually impact their business. And that becomes pretty contagious. As that becomes contagious, 2 things need to happen and they need to be orchestrated. So we get there. We're contagious. We're bought on. We're doing use cases. Yeah, but you still need to say, okay, I'm going to start to scale this and accelerate this. How am I going to increase the velocity, both through in-house teams and through vendors and how you manage them? That's very important. The other moment that I think is really important, and I don't know if I've told anyone this, but my last role, you go to the board, right? And you talk to them about AI. And there was always like the January meeting where I'd go in and talk about AI. 24 was beautiful because I went to second chair. Each of the officers stood up and talked about their strategy and AI was in it. And then I would say a few things. And then at the end, I said, here's how we're pulling it together. And here's what we want to do with vendors, just to say there's a process to manage this and accelerate it across the board. But I thought it was so critical that I was not in first chair. I thought it was, if you're successful at this within your AI leader, should not be leading the AI discussion. If you're there, they should be supporting it. They should be enabling it, using the lawyer. They should not be first chair. They should be second chair. An important second chair, but it needs to be business owned. And it's moments like that where you start to see and say, leadership team is moving this ahead and the technical teams are enabling it as opposed to the technical teams are pushing it ahead because the technical teams aren't the business. That doesn't work.
Yeah, it makes sense. Todd, this was great. We're already at time, moving fast. Where can people, if they want to find you, learn more about the stuff you're doing today, where can people find you, connect with you?
Yeah, I'd love to. Active on LinkedIn, so you can connect with me there. Also, check out Aurora Insights LLC .com. One little business note. I realized I could get the Aurora name, but it's $2 million. So for now, we are going to stick with Aurora Insights LLC.com. A little bit of a learning there, but got a lot of information, a lot of articles, and you can read about what I'm doing. So thank you for asking.
When you switch over the domain to Aurora, we'll know you've made it. You've crushed it, right?
I'm a better businessman than paying $2 million for a domain name at this point, my friend.
Fair enough, Todd. We appreciate your time. Thank you so much
Thanks,
for
Todd.
being with us. Really appreciate it.
Thanks for having me. It's great
See you.
talking to you.